He told me he had poisoned my drink as casually as if he were reminding me to turn off the stove. I did not scream. I simply checked my watch and smiled, because 30 minutes was more than enough time for the truth to claw its way to the surface. By the time the doorbell rang again, he still believed he controlled this house, right up until everyone opened the envelopes. My name is Mara Caldwell. At 39 years old, I had built my career on the ability to detect the slightest deviation from protocol. As a compliance manager for Stonewick Compliance Solutions, my job was to look at a pristine set of data and find the one rot that could collapse the structure. I lived in Hawthorne Ridge, Pennsylvania, a town where the hedges were trimmed to razor-sharp perfection and the secrets were buried deep beneath the manicured soil. My husband, Evan Klein, fit right into this landscape. He was a man who preached harmony and compromise, which was simply his way of disguising his total inability to stand up to his mother. Darla Klein. The notification on my phone arrived with the heavy finality of a court summons. It was a text message from Darla, but it read more like a tactical deployment order for a military operation. She demanded that we host a fundraising gala at our home tomorrow night. The guest list was already finalized, consisting of 28 to 32 people. The text concluded with a directive that made the muscles in my neck tighten. Do not embarrass me. I opened the attachment on my laptop to review the details. The guest list was populated with names I did not recognize. There were wealthy donors from the county, a man listed vaguely as a financial advisor, and one individual whose name was highlighted in red with the note VIP sit near the host. I scrolled down to the seating chart Darla had designed. She had positioned herself at the head of the dining table, the seat of authority, with Evan placed immediately to her right. I scanned the diagram for my own name and finally found it. I was assigned to a small, temporary folding table pushed against the wall near the swinging door to the kitchen. Next to my name, she had written a parenthetical note for ease of service. She did not view me as the lady of the house. She viewed me as the staff. I might have simply deleted the email and started an argument if not for the line of text buried at the very bottom of the document. It was a casual instruction that sent a chill straight down my spine. Prepare papers at the side table. Someone is coming to verify signatures before dessert. I turned the laptop screen toward Evan, who was leaning against the kitchen island, scrolling through sports scores. Evan, have you seen this? I asked, keeping my voice level. Your mother wants a notary here tomorrow night during a dinner party. What exactly am I supposed to be signing? Evan barely glanced at the screen before shrugging. A gesture of practiced indifference. Oh, that. Mom mentioned she has some new investment opportunity for the family trust. She said it is time-sensitive and just needs a formality. You know how she gets when she has an idea in her head. She put me at a folding table by the kitchen door. Evan, I said, pointing at the diagram. In the house that I pay for. He laughed, but the sound was thin and lacked genuine humor. Come on. Mara, you are overthinking it. It is just logistics because of the crowd size. Besides, he looked away, focusing on a spot on the floor. You are good at handling the details. Just treat it like one of your work projects. Keep the peace. Okay. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the cowardice etched into his features. He knew exactly what was happening. He knew about the papers, and he was banking on my history of compliance to let it happen. Okay, I said. Evan blinked, clearly surprised by the lack of resistance. Okay, just like that? Just like that, I replied, turning back to my computer. I will start on the menu. It needs to be perfect. He exhaled a breath of relief, kissed the top of my head, and walked out of the room, believing he had successfully managed me. I waited until I heard the television turn on in the living room before I opened a new tab on my browser. I did not search for catering companies or recipes. Instead, I typed in the web address for an airline and then pulled up the contact information for a specific law firm in Providence, Rhode Island. If they wanted to play games with signatures and assets, I would make sure the rules were rewritten before the first appetizer was served. I began typing a request for an emergency meeting with the attorney who managed my inheritance trust. The house was buried in silence, the kind of heavy quiet that usually signals safety, but the notification glowing on my phone screen screamed of danger. It was 2 in the morning. I was sitting in the darkened living room, the blue light of my laptop illuminating the coffee table, when the alert arrived. It was a notice from a credit monitoring service regarding a hard inquiry on my file. Someone had unlocked my credit freeze by answering the security questions about my mother's maiden name and my first pet, answers that only I and my husband would know. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. I immediately navigated to an old email address I had not used since we purchased the house 5 years ago. My hands hovered over the keyboard for a second before I typed in the password. There it was, an email marked urgent from a document signing service, inviting me to view a loan modification agreement. I checked the access logs on the server. The link had already been clicked 2 hours ago. The device ID listed in the history was not a mystery. It matched the serial number of the iPad currently sitting on the nightstand next to my sleeping husband. I stood up and walked silently to the home office, my bare feet making no sound on the hardwood. I needed physical proof. I pulled open the bottom drawer of Evan's desk, pushing aside old chargers and manuals until I found a crumpled yellow sticky note tucked under a stapler. The handwriting was unmistakably Evan's, scrawled in a hurry. I read the words, and the air left my lungs. Notary cash ID copy okay? I stared at the note, my mind racing to translate the shorthand. ID copy okay? A legitimate notary would never accept a photocopy of an ID for a significant transaction. They required the person to be physically present with the original document. This note suggested they had found someone willing to bypass the law for cash. You are not just lazy. Evan, I whispered to the empty room, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and clarity. You are criminal. The entire plan for tomorrow night suddenly snapped into focus. The crowded party was not about charity. It was a psychological cage. They intended to keep me exhausted with catering duties, surrounded by strangers so I could not make a scene, and pressured by Darla's command to maintain appearances. They would shove a paper in front of me while I was distracted, or worse, they did not intend for me to sign at all. With a crooked notary, they only needed me in the building to establish a timeline, while someone else traced my name on the dotted line. I did not cry. Tears were a luxury for women who were safe. Instead, I pulled out my phone and took high-resolution photographs of the sticky note, the open drawer, and the credit inquiry on my screen. I uploaded everything to a hidden encrypted folder on a remote server, naming the file Holiday Recipes to avoid suspicion. Then, I opened the control app for our home security system. I switched the interior cameras from motion detect to continuous recording. If they planned to commit a crime in my dining room, I would have it all in high definition. I needed them to remain confident. I opened my messaging app and composed a text to Darla. I am not your servant, and I will not let you ruin me. I erased it and retyped it in English, keeping my tone submissive and dutiful. Do not worry. Mom, I have handled everything. The evening will be perfect. I hit send. Let them sleep soundly, thinking the trap was set. I returned to my laptop and opened a new window. I needed to get out of the state. Just for a few hours. My assets were held in a trust managed out of Providence, Rhode Island, a legal firewall I had established before I ever met Evan. I typed a message to my portfolio manager, marking it with the highest priority flag. Emergency meeting required, I typed, my fingers hitting the keys with deliberate force. I suspect attempted fraud regarding the primary residence. I will be in your office by 9 in the morning. I closed the laptop and looked toward the stairs. They wanted a show tomorrow night. I would give them one. I slipped out of the house while the sun was still bleeding into the horizon. Evan was buried under the duvet, snoring softly, believing the lie I had planted the night before. I had told him I needed to drive to the wholesale market in the city to secure fresh seafood for the gala. In reality, I was driving straight to the airport for a short flight to Providence, Rhode Island. By 9 in the morning, I was sitting in a corner office that smelled of lemon polish and old money. Elaine Mercer, the trust manager who had protected my family's assets for 2 decades, sat across from me. She was a woman of 60 with eyes like polished steel and a complete lack of patience for incompetence. She slid a thick file folder across the mahogany desk. This request was flagged immediately by our fraud algorithm, Elaine said, tapping a document on top. It is an application for a home equity line of credit against your property in Hawthorne Ridge. The request is for $250,000. I looked at the signature at the bottom of the page. It was my name. It looked like my hand. The slant of the M was perfect. It looks authentic, I said, feeling a wave of nausea. It is a trace. Elaine corrected me, handing me a magnified image of the signature. See the hesitation marks in the ink flow. Someone projected your signature onto the paper and traced it. It is clumsy work, but it would pass a casual inspection by a bank officer who is not looking for it. However, because the house is in the trust, the bank required a secondary verification. The notary, I realized, exactly. Elaine said, the bank needs a wet signature witnessed by a state official to release the funds. Your husband and mother-in-law cannot fake that part. They need you to physically sign a confirmation document tonight. Once you sign the notary's logbook or the ratification page, you are effectively validating the forged application. You will be accepting the debt as your own. Freeze it. I said, I want the account locked down so tight that not even a court order could pry a penny out of it today. I have already placed a hard freeze on the trust, Elaine assured me. To anyone looking at the system externally, the status will appear as processing or pending final authorization. They will think the money is ready to drop as soon as that notary uploads the confirmation. But in reality, the vault is sealed. She opened a second folder. My team also ran a comprehensive background check on the requesters. You need to see this. She spread out a series of financial reports. It was an autopsy of financial ruin. Darla Klein was not the wealthy matriarch she pretended to be. She was drowning. There were unpaid property taxes dating back 3 years and a looming IRS audit that threatened to seize her assets. And Evan. My husband had maxed out 4 credit cards and had 2 personal loans in default. They do not want to invest in a business, I said, my voice flat. They are bleeding out. They are trying to use your equity to pay off their history, Elaine said. Mara, this is conspiracy to commit wire fraud. We should call the authorities right now. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the Providence streets. If I called the police now, Darla would spin a story about a misunderstanding. She would claim it was a paperwork error. Evan would play the confused husband. They would escape with their reputations intact, and I would be the hysterical wife who overreacted. No, I said, turning back to Elaine. Not yet. Mara, this is dangerous, Elaine warned. If you go back there, I need them to commit the act, I interrupted. I need the intent to be undeniable. I need witnesses. And tonight, Darla has invited 30 people to watch her triumph. I think they should watch her downfall instead. I asked Elaine for one final favor. I needed to use her office printer and her highest quality stationery. I spent the next hour compiling a document that would replace the dinner menu. It was a dossier of betrayal. I included the unauthorized credit inquiry, the forged loan application, the breakdown of Darla's tax liens, and Evan's secret debt. I printed 32 copies. I placed each one inside a heavy, cream-colored envelope. I sealed them with wax, just to make them look official and elegant. They were beautiful. They were heavy. They were the menus for the evening, and I was going to serve them a course they would never be able to digest. I am going home, Elaine, I said, gathering the stack of envelopes. I have a party to host. I arrived back at the house with 90 minutes to spare, moving with the precision of a surgeon prepping for an operation. The kitchen was cold and smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, not the chaotic aroma of roasting meats and simmering sauces that Evan and Darla would expect. I had not cooked a single thing. Instead, I had placed an order with the city's most exclusive catering firm to be delivered to the side entrance. I unpacked the vacuum-sealed containers of filet mignon and truffle mash, transferring them into my own cookware, and buried the delivery boxes deep in the recycling bin. They wanted a perfect hostess, and I would give them one who could conjure a feast out of thin air. Once the food was warming in the oven, I opened my laptop to finalize the security protocols. I accessed the home network and reconfigured the camera settings. Every sensor was now set to continuous recording, bypassing the standard motion activation delay. I routed the feed to automatically back up to an external server managed by a trusted colleague in our IT department. Even if Evan smashed the router or Darla tried to delete the footage later, the data would already be safe in a cloud fortress 3 states away. "Everything is live," I whispered to myself, watching the red recording icon pulse on the screen. Next came the most critical preparation. I sat at the dining table and laid out 32 cream-colored envelopes. These were the menus I had printed in Providence. Inside each one was not a list of appetizers and wines, but a forensic accounting of betrayal. I had included a summary of the unauthorized hard credit inquiry, the log of the digital signature access from Evan's iPad, a breakdown of Evan's hidden credit card debt, and a grim overview of Darla's tax liens. At the bottom of each page was a QR code that linked directly to the raw evidence files. I took a calligraphy pen and wrote the name of each guest on the front of their envelope. Reverend Miller, Mr. Graham Voss, Mrs. Darla Klein. It was a personal touch. I wanted them to feel honored, to feel special, so that when the time came, they would open the envelope with anticipation rather than suspicion. I heard the front door open. Darla had arrived early to inspect her battlefield. "Mara!" Her voice shrilled from the hallway. "The lighting in here is atrocious. Fix it." "I am on it." "Darla," I called back, my voice steady. As soon as she walked into the living room to criticize the floral arrangements, I slipped to the smart lock panel by the back door. I punched in a sequence to change the master administrative code. I did not lock the doors yet. I needed the guests to enter freely. But once the trap was sprung, the old codes, the ones Evan and Darla used, would be useless. They were already locked out of their own sanctuary. They just did not know it yet. I returned to the dining room to finish setting the table. I followed Darla's insulting diagram to the letter. I placed the fine china and crystal goblets at the main table for the guests. Then, I set up the cheap folding table near the kitchen door. I placed a simple white plate there, exactly where she had assigned me. It was a visual representation of my status in their eyes, the servant, the outsider, the wallet. Finally, I went upstairs to dress. Darla had suggested I wear something modest and practical, implying a dress suitable for serving food. I ignored it. I pulled on a charcoal gray tailored suit that I usually reserved for board meetings with federal regulators. It was sharp, authoritative, and distinctly undomestic. I wasn't dressing for a dinner party. I was dressing for a hostile takeover. Before I left the bedroom, I reached into my drawer and took out a small digital stopwatch. I slipped it into the inside pocket of my blazer. I ran my thumb over the start button. The plan was simple. Once the trigger was pulled, I would start the timer. 30 minutes. That was all it would take for the chemicals to work. Or rather, for the psychological poison I was about to serve to take effect. I looked at myself in the mirror. My face was pale, but my eyes were clear. "Showtime," I said softly. The doorbell began to ring at exactly 7 o'clock, signaling the start of the invasion. The guests flowed into the foyer in a wave of expensive perfume and hollow pleasantries. There were 28 people in total, filling the space with a noise that felt designed to drown out thought. I recognized the church committee members Darla used for social leverage, a few local philanthropists whose charities were mostly tax shelters, and Graham Voss, the VIP guest. Voss walked in with the heavy stride of a man who was used to owning every room he entered, his eyes scanning the crowd for value rather than friendship. Evan was performing the role of the devoted patriarch with terrifying ease. He stayed glued to my side, his hand resting firmly on the small of my back. To the guests, it looked like affection. To me, it felt like a shackle. His fingers dug into the fabric of my blazer, steering me toward people, presenting me like a prize heifer at a county fair. This is my incredible wife, Mara. Evan beamed at a couple I had never met. She pulled this whole evening together single-handedly. I am a lucky man. You certainly are, the woman cooed, admiring the house. I smiled, a tight expression that did not reach my eyes, and offered them drinks. I moved through the room with a tray of crystal flutes, pouring wine and sparkling water, but I made absolutely sure that not a single drop passed my own lips. I held a glass for appearances, raising it during toasts, but I never tilted it far enough to drink. I needed my mind razor sharp. Darla was everywhere and nowhere at once. She moved between the guests, accepting compliments on the decor she had not touched and the food she had not cooked, every few minutes. However, she would corner me near the kitchen swing door. "The lights are too dim," she hissed, her smile vanishing the second her back was to the room. "It looks like a funeral parlor in here, and the appetizers were slow coming out. Fix it. I will take care of it." "Darla," I said neutrally. She glared at me. Then her eyes darted to the grandfather clock in the hallway for the third time in 10 minutes. She was not anxious about the lighting. She was counting down the minutes until her fraudulent notary arrived. We sat for dinner. As predicted, I was at the folding table by the door, while Darla held court at the head of the mahogany dining table. The conversation was loud and self-congratulatory. Halfway through the main course, Darla tapped her spoon against her wine glass. The room fell silent. "I would like to propose a toast," Darla announced, standing up and smoothing her dress. She raised her glass toward me, her eyes glittering with malice disguised as warmth. "To my daughter-in-law, Mara. Thank you for opening your home to us and for being such a supportive, understanding wife. It is a blessing to have someone who knows how to put family first." The guests clapped politely. They heard a compliment. I heard the trap snapping shut. She was publicly praising my submission, reinforcing the narrative that I was a willing participant in whatever financial ruin they were about to inflict on me. Evan leaned over from his seat, invading my personal space under the guise of whispering a sweet nothing. His breath smelled of scotch and nerves. "The notary will be at the side door right after the plates are cleared," he whispered, his voice a low rasp that the guests could not hear. "You are going to go into the kitchen, sign the papers, and come back. Do not make a scene, or you will regret it. Just get it done, Mara." I looked at him. He thought he had won. He thought the pressure of the crowd and the weight of his mother's expectations had crushed me. I checked the time. It was the moment. I stood up before the servers could clear the table. The scrape of my chair against the floor was loud enough to draw every eye in the room. Evan looked up, a flicker of panic crossing his face. He reached out to grab my wrist, but I stepped out of his reach. "Before we move to the final course," I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room, "I have a small gift for everyone." I thought the standard menu cards were a bit impersonal, so I prepared something special for tonight. I picked up the stack of heavy cream-colored envelopes from the sidebar. I began to circle the table, placing an envelope in front of each guest. I moved methodically. Graham Voss got his first, then the church members, then the business partners. I saved the last two for the head of the table. I placed one envelope in front of Darla, who looked at it with narrowed eyes. I placed the final one in front of Evan. "What is this?" Evan asked, his smile faltering. "A surprise," I said, stepping back to the center of the room so I could see everyone. "Please, do not open them yet. I think it would be much more fun if we all opened them together, just for the thrill of it." The murmur of the guests turned into confused whispering when the side door opened. A man in a cheap suit stood there, clutching a leather briefcase to his chest. He looked like a deer caught in headlights, scanning the room full of well-dressed strangers. This was the notary, arriving too early or perhaps right on time for disaster. Darla stood up immediately, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. She marched toward me, her hand clamping onto my upper arm like a vice. "Kitchen." "Now," she muttered through a clenched smile, trying to make it look like a motherly intervention to the onlookers. I let myself stumble slightly. I brought a hand to my forehead, feigning a sudden wave of vertigo. It was a calculated weakness. I wanted them to think the stress, or whatever else they had planned, was finally taking its toll. "I feel a little lightheaded," I said, letting my voice waver just enough to sound convincing. Evan was there in an instant, blocking the view of the guests with his broad back. He played the concerned husband perfectly, guiding me forcefully toward the swinging door of the kitchen, isolating me from the witnesses. "Let's get you some water, honey," he said loud enough for the room to hear. The moment the kitchen door swung shut, cutting us off from the party, the mask dropped completely. Evan pushed me up against the stainless steel refrigerator. He was not smiling anymore. His face was pale, sweating, and desperate. The notary hovered by the back entrance, looking at his shoes, clearly paid enough not to ask questions, but not enough to enjoy the violence. Evan leaned in close, his face inches from mine. I could smell the stale alcohol on his breath. He lowered his voice to a terrifying whisper. "Listen to me very carefully. Mara, you are going to sign the papers this guy has. You are going to do it right now. And if I don't," I asked, staring straight into his dilated pupils. He let out a short, sharp breath, almost like a laugh. "You do not have a choice. I put something in your drink earlier, a sedative, strong stuff. My blood ran cold, but my pulse did not spike. I had not drunk the wine, but he did not know that. He believed he had already won. I poisoned you," he said, testing the weight of the words, "just enough to make you compliant, just enough to knock you out if you fight it. In 30 minutes, you are going to be asleep on the floor, and I will guide your hand on that paper anyway. So do yourself a favor. Sign it while you can still hold the pen." He expected fear. He expected me to beg or cry. Instead, I looked down at the small digital stopwatch tucked inside my blazer pocket. I mentally calculated the timeline. "So," I said softly, 30 minutes is enough. Enough for what he snapped. I did not answer him. I raised my left wrist and tapped a specific sequence on my smartwatch. It was a dead man switch I had configured with the IT team earlier that day. A silent alert containing my GPS location and the last 5 minutes of audio recording, including his confession, was instantly uploaded and emailed to Elaine Mercer and my attorney. I pushed past him. "Mara," he hissed, grabbing at my shoulder. "Where do you think you are going?" I shoved the kitchen door open and stepped back into the dining room. The chatter stopped instantly. Every face turned toward me. I stood at the head of the table, flanked by the silence. "Everyone," I said, my voice projecting clear and strong, betraying no sign of the sedative he thought was coursing through my veins. "Please, do not let me ruin the dinner. I think it is time we open the envelopes." I saw Evan freeze in the doorway behind me, his face drained of all color. He looked at the guests holding the sealed letters. Then he looked at me. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had just confessed to poisoning his wife to cover up a financial crime. If those envelopes contained what he feared they contained, he had not just admitted to coercion. He had admitted to attempted murder. "Mara, wait," Evan shouted, his voice cracking. "Open them," I commanded. Graham Voss was the first to break the silence. He tore the wax seal on his envelope, the sound ringing out like a gunshot in the quiet room. He did not rip it open carelessly. He slid his finger under the flap with the precision of a man who handled contracts for a living. He pulled out the single sheet of heavy cardstock, adjusted his glasses, and read the bold header. I watched his eyes narrow. He pulled out his phone, not to check a text, but to scan the QR code printed at the bottom of the page. The silence in the room was replaced by the dry, rustling sound of paper being torn open. It was a domino effect. Once Voss started reading, curiosity overwhelmed politeness. "This says there was a hard inquiry on your credit yesterday," Voss said, his voice cutting through the tension. "Authorized by a device registered to Evan Klein." "It is a mistake," Evan stammered, lunging toward Voss to grab the paper. "Give me that. It is just a prank, a murder mystery game. You know how Mara loves her stories." Voss pulled the paper out of Evan's reach, his expression hardening. "This does not look like a game. Son, this looks like a credit report." Down the table, Mrs. Gable, a pillar of the local church committee, gasped. She looked at her paper, then at Darla, her face flushing pink. "Darla, Mrs. Gable said, her voice trembling with indignation. "This lists a tax lien for $40,000 and a default on a personal loan. You told the committee that the foundation's funds were being managed with biblical transparency. Is this why you needed the emergency donation last week? That is private financial data," Darla shrieked, abandoning her poise. She stood up, knocking her chair over. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "Do not listen to her. Can't you see? She is having an episode. Mara has been under so much stress lately. She is delusional. She concocted all of this because she is mentally unstable." The guests hesitated. Darla was good at this. She played the concerned mother perfectly, her eyes wide with fake worry. "She is off her medication." Darla lied, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "She hallucinates. She thinks people are stealing from her." "Oh, my poor Mara." Evan latched onto the narrative immediately. Yes, she is sick. Please, everyone, just give us the envelopes. We need to get her to a doctor." I stood still at the head of the table. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply waited for them to finish their performance. "If I am having an episode," I said, my voice calm and steady, "and if this is all a hallucination, then why is there a notary public standing in my kitchen with a loan modification agreement waiting for my signature?" I pointed to the swinging door. All eyes turned. The door creaked open, pushed by the notary who had clearly heard enough shouting to become concerned for his own safety. He peeked his head out, clutching his briefcase, looking terrified. I was told the signing was at 7:30. The notary stammered into the stunned silence. The color drained from Darla's face. The medical episode defense evaporated instantly. "You cannot hallucinate a man in a cheap suit holding a stamp. He is part of it," Evan yelled, desperate now. She hired him. "Let us ask the bank," I said. I pulled my phone from my pocket and placed it in the center of the centerpiece, amidst the white lilies. I tapped the screen. The call was already connected. "Elaine, are you on the line?" I asked. "I am here. Mara." Elaine Mercer's voice filled the dining room, sharp and authoritative via the speakerphone. "And I am recording this call. Can you please confirm the status of the loan application regarding the property at Hawthorne Ridge?" The application was flagged for fraud this morning, Elaine stated, her voice leaving no room for argument. The signature on the request form was a digital trace, not an original. "We have also confirmed that the IP address used to submit the request originated from the residence of Evan Klein, while the homeowner, Mara Caldwell, was confirmed to be in my office in Rhode Island. Any attempt to notarize this document tonight is a felony act of wire fraud and forgery." The room went deathly quiet. This was not gossip. This was a legal indictment delivered over dessert. Furthermore, Elaine continued, "The trust has been locked. No funds will be released, and I have already forwarded the packet to the district attorney's office. I looked at Evan. He was gripping the back of a chair, his knuckles white. The guests were no longer looking at their food. They were looking at my husband and mother-in-law like they were something rotting in the sun. It seems, I said, meeting Evan's terrified gaze, that the truth has arrived a little earlier than 30 minutes. It is just a misunderstanding, Darla screamed. Her composure, usually a fortress of hairspray and pearls, was finally shattering. Her voice cracked, betraying the panic rising in her throat. Elaine is confused. The bank is confused. We were just trying to help Mara manage her assets. This is a family matter. Evan grabbed my hand under the table. His grip was wet with sweat. He leaned in, his voice a frantic whimper meant only for my ears. "Baby, please," he begged, his eyes wide and terrified. "Tell them you are joking. I will do anything. Just stop this." Then, he snapped his head up toward the guests, plastering a terrifying plastic smile onto his face. It was a mask that didn't fit anymore. "She is such a prankster," Evan laughed, but the sound was thin and hysterical, always keeping us on our toes with her little stories. The sight of him begging me with his eyes while grinning at them with his mouth sent a wave of visible revulsion through the room. It was the behavior of a cornered animal, not a loving husband. "He is not joking," I said, my voice cutting through his performance like a scalpel. I looked at the guests, making direct eye contact with the Reverend to ensure he heard every word. And he is not worried about my assets. 5 minutes ago, inside that kitchen, my husband told me that he had put a sedative in my drink. I pointed to the untouched wine glass sitting in front of my empty plate. He said, "I poisoned you." I quoted him with chilling precision. He told me I had 30 minutes before I passed out, and that he would use my hand to sign the papers regardless of whether I was conscious or not. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a room realizing that a dinner party had just mutated into a crime scene. Mrs. Gable covered her mouth with a linen napkin. The Reverend stood up, his chair tipping backward with a clatter. "Oh, my God," someone whispered from the end of the table. "We need to call an ambulance," a male guest said, fumbling for his phone. "If she has been dosed?" "Yes," I said calmly. "Please call 911. I did not drink the wine, but I want the police to take the glass into evidence. I want a toxicology screen on the liquid to prove intent." Darla let out a strangled noise. She grabbed Evan's arm, her fingernails digging aggressively into his suit jacket. "We are leaving," Darla hissed, pulling at him. "This is ridiculous. I will not stay here and be slandered by a lunatic. Come on, Evan." She tried to drag him toward the hallway, but Graham Voss stepped into their path. He did not look like a donor anymore. He looked like a creditor who realized his investment was about to vanish. He crossed his arms over his chest, blocking their exit with his sheer physical presence. "Sit down, Darla," Graham said, his voice low and dangerous. "If those papers are fake, and if that credit report is real, then my money is gone. You are not going anywhere until I know exactly whose assets you were planning to use to pay me back." Darla froze. She looked at Graham, then at the door, realizing she was trapped by the very social circle she had tried to manipulate. I turned my attention to the notary, who was still hovering near the kitchen door, clutching his briefcase as if it could shield him from the fallout. I picked up the copy of the loan modification form from the table, the one Elaine had emailed me earlier, and held it up for him to see. "Sir," I addressed him, "is this the document you were hired to notarize tonight? Is this the paper my husband wanted me to sign while I was unconscious?" He looked at the paper, then at Evan, and finally at me. He realized that silence would only make him an accomplice to a felony. "Yes," the notary admitted, his voice barely audible. I was told it was a ratification. that the signature was already on file and I just needed to witness the confirmation. So you were here to validate a signature that I never made, I clarified. I suppose so, he stammered, wiping sweat from his forehead. I didn't know it was like this. Now you do, I said. The confirmation hung in the air, stripping away the last shred of their defense. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a conspiracy. Evan slumped into his chair, burying his face in his hands. Darla stared at the wall, her mouth opening and closing wordlessly. Then, the sound came. It was not the polite chime of the doorbell. It was a heavy, authoritative pounding on the front door. 3 sharp, distinct knocks that demanded entry. It was the sound of the law arriving to collect the bill. The pounding on the front door ceased, replaced by the sound of the latch clicking open. A man in a nondescript windbreaker stepped into the foyer, looking out of place amidst the crystal chandelier and the terrified guests. He did not apologize for the interruption. He pulled 2 thick envelopes from his jacket, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on the head of the table. "Evan Klein?" he asked, his voice flat and professional. Evan nodded dumbly, too shocked to speak. The man thrust the first envelope into his chest. "You have been served." He turned to the woman beside him. "Darla Klein, you have been served as well." Evan tore open the packet with trembling hands. I watched the color drain from his face as he read the bold headings. It was not just a petition for divorce. It was an emergency motion for exclusive possession of the marital residence, filed on the grounds of domestic abuse and financial fraud. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with betrayal, as if he were the victim. Darla ripped into her own envelope, finding a civil lawsuit naming her as a defendant for harassment and conspiracy to commit fraud. I did not give them a moment to recover. I unlocked my phone and held the screen up for the guests nearest to me to see. "Look at the timestamps," I said, pointing to the digital log I had pulled up. "This shows the digital signature portal was accessed from a device in this house at 2 p.m. yesterday. At that exact time, I was sitting in a compliance meeting at my office. Here is the verified attendance log." I swiped to the next evidence file. "And if you still think I am imagining things..." I tapped the play button on the audio file I had recorded in the kitchen. The volume was set to maximum. Evan's voice, unmistakable and cruel, sliced through the air. "I poisoned you." It was just 3 words, but they hung in the room like smoke. There was no context needed. It was a confession. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the digital stopwatch. I held it up. The numbers were racing toward the 30-minute mark. 30 minutes, I said, my voice steady. "You told me that in 30 minutes. I would be unable to argue. You said I would be compliant." I watched the seconds tick over. "The time is up, Evan. I am still standing. I am still speaking." "Which means the only thing you succeeded in doing tonight was proving your intent to incapacitate me." The wail of sirens cut through the night air, growing louder until red and blue lights flashed against the dining room windows. The guests who had called 911 had done their job. The paramedics burst through the front door a moment later, flanked by 2 police officers. Their arrival transformed my dining room from a social gathering into an active crime scene. An EMT immediately moved to my side, checking my pupils and pulse. The reality of the flashing lights finally broke Darla. She scrambled backward, knocking over her wine glass. "It was him," Darla shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at her son. "I did not know he was going to drug her. He told me he would handle it. I just wanted the papers signed. He is the one who touched the glass." Evan turned on her, his face twisted in ugly desperation. "You told me we had to get the money. You said the IRS was going to take the house. You made me do this." They screamed at each other, trading accusations, tearing each other apart in front of the very people they had tried to impress. The mask of the perfect family had not just slipped, it had disintegrated. I stepped away from the EMT for a moment and addressed the room one last time. This house is the property of the Caldwell Family Trust, I declared, my voice cutting over their bickering. I am the sole beneficiary. Any transaction attempted against this property without my verified consent is fraud. And now, you all know exactly what that looks like. The guests began to stand up. They did not say goodbye. They did not look at Evan or Darla. They simply turned and walked toward the door in a heavy, judgmental silence. But I noticed something as they filed out. Almost every single one of them was clutching the cream-colored envelope I had given them. They were taking the bank records, the tax liens, and the proof of debt with them. Darla tried to reach out to Mrs. Gable as she passed. "Barbara, please, wait. Mrs. Gable pulled her arm away as if she had been burned and kept walking, clutching the menu of truth tightly against her purse. The evidence was out in the world now, and no amount of screaming would ever bring it back. The digits on the stopwatch settled on exactly 30 minutes. I held the device up so Evan could see the time he had allotted for my destruction. He was slumped in his chair, his tie loosened, looking less like a master manipulator and more like a man watching his life drain away. "You chose 30 minutes to control me," I told him, my voice devoid of any sympathy. "I used 30 minutes to bury your plan." On the speakerphone, Elaine Mercer delivered the final nail in their coffin. Her voice was crisp, professional, and loud enough for the police officers now standing in the foyer to hear clearly. "I have confirmed the lock on the trust," Elaine announced. "The entire portfolio has been frozen. The file regarding the attempted wire fraud and the forged signature samples has been electronically transferred to the fraud division of the district attorney's office. There will be no withdrawal of funds today, or ever." I turned to the lead police officer and handed him my phone. "The audio file on this device contains a confession from my husband regarding the administration of a sedative," I stated, "and the guests in this room witnessed his attempt to coerce a signature on a financial document while I was under duress." The notary public, realizing he was standing in the blast radius of a felony investigation, made his move. He hurriedly stuffed the unsigned loan modification papers back into his briefcase. "I am terminating this session," the notary stammered, backing away from Evan. "I cannot proceed with a notarization when there is evidence of coercion and whatever this is, I am leaving." He did not wait for permission. He bolted for the door, taking the only hope Evan had of accessing my money with him. I looked down at my husband. The process server's papers were still in his lap. The order for exclusive possession meant he had to leave. But I decided to give him the dignity of walking out before he was dragged out. "You have a choice, Evan," I said. "The temporary restraining order is effective immediately. You can leave this house right now, on your own 2 feet, or you can wait for the officers to escort you out in handcuffs when the toxicology report comes back." "What is it going to be?" Evan looked at the police, then at the empty table where the notary had been. He crumbled. There was no fight left in him, no arrogant smile, just the hollow realization that he had gambled his marriage and his freedom on a bluff. And I had called it. He stood up slowly, shaking, and began to walk toward the door without looking at his mother. Darla, seeing her son retreat, tried one last desperate lunge at me. She stepped forward, her face twisted in a snarl. "You ungrateful, manipulative little—" Darla started to scream, raising her hand as if to point a finger in my face, but she never finished the sentence. She bumped into Mrs. Gable, the church committee head, who recoiled instantly. Mrs. Gable pulled her shawl tight around her shoulders and took a deliberate step away from Darla, looking at her with pure disgust. The other guests followed suit, parting like the Red Sea to avoid touching the woman who had tried to defraud her own daughter-in-law. Darla looked around the room, seeking an ally, but found only judgment. The social capital she had spent decades hoarding had vanished in a single hour. I reached into my briefcase one last time. I pulled out a single sheet of paper that had nothing to do with Evan or Darla. It was an internal transfer request for my company, approving my relocation to the Providence branch. I had printed it that morning. I uncapped my pen and signed it right there on the dining table, pressing down hard enough to leave an impression. I looked at the room of stunned onlookers, at the police taking statements, and finally at Evan and Darla, who were now nothing more than strangers to me. "I did not ruin your dinner," I said, my voice ringing with finality. "I just stopped a robbery." I turned my back on them. I walked out the front door and into the cool, biting air of the Pennsylvania night. I did not look back at the house. I did not check to see if they were watching. Behind me, they were trapped in a wreckage of legal fees, criminal charges, and public humiliation. Ahead of me, the street was empty and quiet. I walked toward my car, breathing in the cold air, feeling lighter than I had in years. The knot was untied, the debt was paid, and for the first time in a long time, the time belonged entirely to me. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please comment your city or country below so we can share our thoughts together. Don't forget to subscribe to the Victoria Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and please hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people.